The designer has the vision or dream of what to create on stage. Drafting allows the designer to communicate the dream to the creative team, who will then build the set. In drafting, we are trying to lay out a three-dimensional world on paper using 2 dimensions at a time. The ground plan is usually thought of as a bird's eye view of the stage and aids the designer in developing the scenic design. It is also used by the director for establishing the flow of action. For the lighting designer, it is a mandatory instrument for planning the lights. And for the stage technician, it is invaluable in determining the placement of the scenery. Let's go over how to read a scale ruler. Scale rulers allow us to draw things on paper in the same proportion but smaller. The size of the piece being drawn and the paper determine which scale we have to use. Each ruler has many scales represented. Each scale starts with a 12-inch measurement in a particular scale on one side marked 0. We begin by measuring the space the show will be produced in. Once we have the measurements, we can start with the ground plot. It is important that we point out the center line, plaster line, and in our space, the concrete line. Now that we have the ground plan, let's go over the ground plan and the different symbols so that we can better read and understand the ground plan. Regardless of what the view we're looking at, all pages of drafting have to have a title block. The title block contains important information identifying this production with the set of designers and director. The information includes, but is not limited to, the name of the show, name of the theater or venue, director's name, designer's name, scale, date of drafting, and page numbers. The ground plan should include the center line of the space, which is important for load-in of the set when time comes. Where the set is in relationship to the proscenium. Then we can need to identify where the set is in terms of plaster line, as well as the back wall. On a ground plan, the architectural parts of the building, the parts of the theater that we cannot change, are hatched or heavily filled in. Ground plans must also have a fly plot line schedule. This details all the things that fly and what batten or pipe they fly on. On the ground plan, there are different types of lines to represent different things. Single lines that are medium weight represent edges of platforms. There will be a circle in the platform and stair units to designate the height of the platform from the stage floor. Double lines indicate walls. There will be dashed spaces in the walls to represent doors and windows. There can be other details for furniture information on the ground plan. A lot of otherwise confusing shapes are labeled with leader notes and specify their placement and size. This section is a vertical, dissected view of the entire theater, including the audience seating. If we cut the whole theater in half along the center line, the cut goes through all scenery on stage and the fly plot, with flown items shown at their specific height. This will also include the masking and show the location of all lighting positions, both in the house and on stage. Elevations. Elevations show either the front, back, or sides of a portion of the ground plan that is elevated into a straight-on, flattened out, full face, no perspective view of that part of the set. Elevations come in 2 formats, projected and extended. Projected is the straight-on view of the entire set. Extended is a set of walls separated and drawn into full detail, and clearly labeled. The lightweight lines on bottom and the sides are dimensional lines. They say exactly how tall and wide the walls are. There also can be leader notes describing materials and paint treatments the walls will get. Light plot. The light plot is a drawing indicating the placement of the lighting equipment in the theater. The primary purpose is to depict in scale the exact location of lighting instruments used in particular production. It should show the location of the scenery in relationship to the physical structure of the theater. Information about instrument type, color, and control is indicated. A light plot also includes a legend describing each of the symbols used on the light plot as well as the title block that details the pertinent information about the production. CAD. Plans can be created by drafting with pencil or by using a computer. Regardless of the method of drafting, the details on plans remain the same. Computer-aided drafting, or CAD, are programs that can be used to produce plans, sections, elevations, and lighting plots. Depending on the skill and experience of the user and the complexity of what's being drawn, it may or may not take longer to draft on a computer than by hand. Computer drafting reduces the time needed to make corrections and changes to the drawing. The computer can also draw objects in 3 dimensions and show them in different views. It is debatable that learning to draft by hand is a better way to learn basic principles than learning on a computer. You will find yourself in situations where you must draft something and either you don't have access to a computer or you don't know the software on the computer. Therefore, you still need to be able to read a scale ruler, operate a T-square, a triangle, draw a straight line, and perform other drafting skills. Models are the most useful in visualizing the composition of a scenic design and its relationship to the theater space and the audience. Most often constructed in a half-inch scale, the model is a miniature version of this finished set. Rendering. A typical rendering of a scenic design shows the setting as it appears to the audience. Most likely it will represent an important or dramatic scene from the production. The designer renders it to indicate how the setting will look under stage lights, complete with mood, atmosphere, and depth. Renderings can be done in all sorts of painting and drawing media, including watercolors, acrylics, pastels, charcoal, ink, colored pencils, chalk, or even oil paints. The designer selects the medium in terms of what works best for him or her and will give the desired results. Often, it's a combination of many media. Renderings can also be done with the aid of a computer. There are many drawings and painting programs on the market. Once the ground plan, sectionals, elevations, model, and renderings have been developed and signed off by the production team, we can begin to take the pieces of scenery like flats, platforms, and stair units and draw them with further detail using elevations, also known as working drawings or mechanicals. Now the construction can begin.
Now that we've gone through some of the basics of drafting, we're going to go over the specific process of a production of Mamma Mia that we did here in 2019. I was the scenic designer for that and the primary one, drawing mechanicals and working on the drafting for that. The drafting and the design process go hand in hand. It's really hard to come up with a beautiful design without thinking about the drafting side of things, thinking about the placement, the size of things, and where everything is going to actually fit on stage or off stage. For Mamma Mia specifically, we knew at least that we wanted a 2-story set. This proposed some questions. How much height could we add to the set? How much playing space did we need on the first level compared to the second level? Did we need anywhere to put things off stage? All of these questions require some amount of drafting to answer, and they're the same questions that a designer asks when thinking about the aesthetic of a show. They just might have different answers that are maybe more technical and precise. But no matter what, the two have to go hand in hand in any situation, so you know your limitation. The front elevation helped to answer a lot of these questions. And for me, it's where I started with Mamma Mia. It's also where I went through the most drafts. It was kind of where I was just putting all of the ideas in my brain on paper from a front view so that we could see what things might look like. Now, for Mamma Mia, we knew we wanted a stationary set. This is also called a unit set, or just a set that doesn't ever move on stage. It's one large piece where most of the playing spaces are, and nothing else really comes on stage except for maybe some small pieces, chairs, tables, a bed, etc. Having a unit set, in my opinion, can make something feel a little more grand. You can really fill up the space and use it to its fullest potential. You don't really have to worry about storage off stage, and you kind of get a little more freedom in that sense. Also, having that slightly more grand of a set can really help to transport the audience the second they walk into a space. They walk into the space and there's this big unit on stage that completely changes the way the theater normally looks. There are so many different ways to perceive a script, the director's thoughts, and the parameters of a theater. I typically start with the parameters of a theater because that shows how big I can make something, and I can scale it down from there if it's a show where you want something to be big and fill up a space and really transport people. This is the final draft of the front elevation for Mamma Mia. Once it was approved by the director, after many, many drafts, we were able to move on to the next part of the process, which is the ground plan. The cool thing about having a unit set is that typically there's one main ground plan that you can just make copies of and then add in any little pieces for each different scene. So you can have your big main ground plan and then add in your chairs for this scene, your bed for this scene, your tables for that scene, or whatever it might be. Now, the front elevation only showed what the walls might look like from the front. It doesn't show you anything about the depth of the stage itself or the set itself. When I would draw the front elevation, I would have an idea in mind already, so moving it into a ground plan wasn't too difficult. I really try to build a ground plan off of what we call stock pieces, so pieces that come in standard size materials or pieces that we know we will have sitting around. This can really help with time or money or the amount of labor that we have available to us. It's really important to think about those things while you're drafting for a show. If you just go crazy and make something as extravagant as possible, you may end up with not enough time, or you'll run out of money, or whatever it might be, and then you'll end up with a problem in the future. Drafting isn't just measuring and drawing things out and hoping that someone can figure out how to build it from your instructions, but it also is planning 10 steps ahead and making sure that you're ready for anything. So for Mamma Mia specifically, we knew we had a really visual learner as a director, so we thought it was very important to make a white model for this show. The white model also is a really good way to take what's in your brain and show it to other people. So we reached the final production meeting, and at this point we had a white model, a ground plan, a front elevation, and a color palette prepared to show the director so that we could for sure get moving on the building process. You always want to make sure that everything's super approved before you actually start constructing anything, because you don't want to waste your time or money. So at that last production meeting, everything was approved. The director had their ground plan and their white model, and they were able to visualize everything, and it was great. We were moving on to the building process. Now, something that I have added into the drafting / building process is a build list. I think it's really important to keep track of where you are in the process and always keep an eye on your time and how much work you have left to do, as well as how much budget you have left. Now, the build list for Mamma Mia was really extensive. It had a lot of platforms, a lot of legs, a lot of stairs of different sizes. It was a lot of pieces and a lot of walls that were kind of funky shapes, so they weren't something we could just pull out of stock. I knew that it would be a lot, so keeping track of all of that was really important. The build list also works for me as a really good checklist of what mechanical drawings I have to make. So I started with the bottom of the unit, typically towards center stage, and spread out from there. You have to draw mechanical drawings for every platform, every section of a unit, every wall, every staircase, whatever it is, they all have to be laid out as clearly as possible. And it's honestly one of my favorite parts of doing this. I love the math and I love the challenge, and I think it's really fun. Creating something like a unit set is like a giant puzzle piece, and I love puzzles and I love figuring it out. Personally, drafting is one of my favorite parts of the entire theater process. I think it's so exciting to finally use all of that math and geometry that everyone learns in school. And I think it's really fun to solve all the little problems and quirks that a production presents. Also, I think that drafting is the biggest step getting from a drawing and a design on paper to an actual real-life playground that actors get to use. functions that is mechanicals, and there it's I think it's really great. The draft. So I bought all, what are they called?
Blah blah.
Oh my god, now the tiny hands are just in the corner of the shot.
Hold on.